Hey, Tatiana, thanks for being on the show.
Thanks for having me, Jay.
So I'm really excited to hear about everything that you've got going on from an entrepreneurial perspective, especially the fact that you have a brand new book that you're working on. That's a lot of work. Ironically, the person that I just interviewed earlier today, she's actually a book writing coach and helps people write books or even ghost writes books for them, which is pretty wild. So we'll get to talking about the book in a little bit. But tell us a little bit about your entrepreneurial journey. Like entrepreneurship, I always think, is a little bit of a crazy idea to some extent. It makes more sense to go work for another business that already has systems in place and plans and everything else. And so what made you want to branch out into this entrepreneurial world? What did that look like for you?
So when I was growing up, I always sort of wanted to be a professional. I initially wanted to be an attorney. Then I came to the United States and I sort of fell in love with accounting as I was getting my bachelor's degree. But my dad has always been a serial entrepreneur. He was always starting a business, finding a deal, and I kind of watched him. I never really intentionally wanted to become a business owner, but it sort of happened that early into my career, I started working for several small businesses doing bookkeeping, and I went to school at the same time for accounting. So I was juggling 5 or 6 clients plus 5 or 6 classes, and that happened for about 3 years. After I graduated, I knew that I wanted to get my CPA license, so I went to work for an accounting firm because not only for the license requirement, but also for the tax experience. And I got lucky because I went to work for a small firm, so I got hands-on experience on day one. They just handed me folders and said, well, get started and look at prior years, and that's it. So while I was working there, I was working kind of hard, a lot of hours, long hours. But I realized that I will always want to work for myself. It's just sort of a thought that came to me that, no matter what I do, I don't see myself working for anyone else. And in a couple of years, I got pregnant and didn't want my daughter to go through the stress of tax season. So I quit and I started building my own practice and have been at it ever since.
So it's interesting because earlier you said that you fell in love with accounting. Now, I'm going to be honest, there's not a lot of people that use the word fall in love and accounting in the same sentence. But thank God for people like you, because we need people to get this stuff right.
Yeah.
So earlier you said when you came to the U.S., where did you come from? And I'm just curious, how old were you when you moved to the United States?
I moved at 19 and I came for the summer, and it just circumstances kind of unfolded so that I stayed. I came from Belarus. Belarus has been in the news recently, but it's a country in Eastern Europe, although geographically it's actually the center of Europe. So yeah, I've been here since I was 19, about 17 years, and counting.
Wow, that's great. My wife is actually originally from England, but she moved here when she was 13. Unfortunately, she doesn't have a British accent because she got rid of it in American middle school, which will tend to do that to people. It makes people want to be like everybody else, which I'm really sad that she doesn't have that British accent, but whatever, it's fine. So as you worked for a big accounting firm, and then you eventually decided to work for yourself. A lot of people, that happens, right? They work for somebody else, and eventually they go, you know what, I think I could do this myself, and I want to give it a try. What they don't realize often is all the other pieces of the puzzle that come along with running your own business. It's not just a matter of doing the thing that you do, whatever that is, whether it's accounting or cupcake baking. It doesn't matter what the thing is, because there's all these other things that go along with running a business. There's, most people struggle with managing the books, but I imagine you don't struggle with that because that's kind of your forte. But there's sales that are involved. How do I acquire new clients? And how do I manage those clients? There's relationship management of those clients. It's not just a matter of doing their taxes. It's a matter of making them feel like they can trust you, right? There's all these things that are involved in running a business. So along the way in those early years, what were some things that were the most surprising to you in the process?
Early into kind of being on my own, I kind of put these labels on myself. You know, I'm not a good salesperson. I hate selling. I'm not a good writer and all these other things. And it's interesting because they're completely self-inflicted. And that's kind of surprising to me. It was surprising to me to learn, you know, when I hired a business coach, I was surprised that I'm actually good at selling when I want to sell something. Because let's say I see that this particular person needs my service.
Right.
Then it just becomes a natural, completely simple thing. Same thing with the writing. I mean, I wrote a book in 3 months by just, you know, having a simple approach of 6 a.m. writing sprints, and my book was done. So that's kind of was one of the first surprises. Another surprise was that it wasn't that a lot of people commoditized my service. And it was, at first I was trying to compete and try to take every client that came through the door, but that's not a great strategy. And I learned that kind of 5 or 6 years into it. So yeah, that was fun times.
So it's always interesting when I hear people talk about past like that, because usually like people start laughing about like just the realities of what it was like in the early days. Yeah. But it wasn't really funny when it's happening, right? It's hard in those seasons. It's overwhelming. And a lot of people listening to the show, maybe they're starting a business, or maybe they've been in business for a few years, and they're just, you know, they started it to have more money or to have more freedom or to be able to do something they're really passionate about. And in many cases, they find they're not doing any of those things because they're so busy with all the other stuff. One of the things I love that you said is you were talking about how you said to yourself, I'm not a good salesperson. I'm not a good writer. Ironically, a couple of days ago, one of my team members was cleaning out some old servers and found this old blog site that I used to write on like a long time ago. It was like a personal blog. And I found the first blog that I wrote in like 2009, which is 11 years ago. And it starts out with basically talking about how I'm not a very good writer. Well, now I write all the time. Like I have one book that's published. I'm working on my second one. I write tons of long form social media posts. But I declared that reality that I wasn't a good writer. And then I said, you know what, but I'm just going to do this thing anyway. Because I do think people have inherent strengths and weaknesses. That's for sure. We all have our own gifts. But sometimes we declare weaknesses over ourselves that are not real weaknesses. Yeah. Maybe we just need to cultivate them.
Yeah, exactly.
So I'm interested too, like the sales side, you were talking about how, like, I think what people think is like what you just said. I don't think you really didn't think you were a good salesperson. You didn't like the idea of sales. Like a lot of people don't like the idea of, you know, the salesperson. But if you really have a product or service that you actually believe is going to help somebody else, you're happy to share it with them. And that's what's so cool about that.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
So let's talk about the writing of the book then, because I'm already on kind of a book writing kick. I'm working on one myself right now. And then I talked to somebody earlier who ghostwrites for people. So you said you did a 6 a.m. writing sprint. What did that look like? And how much did you write every day? Like, what's that looked like for you as far as constructing the book?
So I worked with, I don't know if you're familiar with Mike Michalowicz. He's the author of Profit First and other books, but like, I guess my favorite book is Profit First. And so Mike has a writing partner, AJ Harper, and AJ Harper is a publishing strategist. She's a phenomenal writer and a phenomenal editor. And she has her own book workshop. So I attended the book workshop, and part of the workshop was actually writing at 6 a.m. So because I have kids and the day kind of, you know, I have my business, my practice, waking up at 5:55, we would start writing for 20 minutes, stop for 5 minutes, just chit chat, ask questions if we have any, kind of run our ideas by other authors or whatever, then write again for 20 minutes and then talk again for 5-10 minutes. So 6 to 7 we would write. And typically there's no set word count that I would write every day consistently, But there were some days that I could barely squeeze out 45 words, but there were days where I would write 1,200 words. So it's just the routine helped me just organize and take and kind of, that expression, how to eat an elephant one spoon at a time. The sprints were the spoon for the book. And it seemed like it's never going to happen. But then slowly, day after day, you write your 1,200 words, 400 words, it accumulated to 60,000 words. So it was really fun. And I started applying that to my business as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually love Mike's writing. There's a book that he wrote not that long ago called Clockwork, which was a really big deal for me. He talks about this idea of taking 30 days off and you're being able to take 30 days off in your business. And we actually just did that. I had planned to do that this year before there was a global pandemic. But then I did it anyway. And I took 30 days and we did an RV trip around the country with our 5 kids. And it was amazing. But, having those strategies along the way of people like Mike who can help go, hey, here's some ideas. Of course, you like Profit First as the accountant too. But even out there, it's not read any of Mike's books, Pumpkin Plan, Profit First, Clockwork. He's got a new one that I haven't read yet called Fix This First, something like that.
Fix This Next, yeah.
Fix This Next, that's right. I was close. And so if you haven't read his books, go check those out for sure. So as you were, as you're building this kind of accounting firm, the thing that stands out to me as a thought process, as you said earlier, that people kind of commoditize what you do. And that's true for sure, because there are so many accountants, there's so many CPAs, as there are lawyers and doctors. So how have you found a way to set yourself apart so that other people can go, you know what, this is who I want to work with? Like what's allowed you to kind of come up with that framework?
So I've transformed my practice about 2 years ago, but I've only just now read the Blue Ocean Strategy book. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but the concept is very simple. I see that you're nodding, you know what the book is about. And as I was reading the book, I realized that what I did was create a blue ocean. So traditionally, accountants, in order to make a decent living, would have to have 300 to 400 clients, do their taxes, do some bookkeeping, give you some free tips on what you should do, and, answer quick questions. That was the original setup. The problem with that setup has been for years, for decades, has been that we as accountants didn't have the right focus. And our focus, the wrong focus, was a tax return is the service. Taxes in general is the thing that people hate dealing with. They hate thinking about taxes. Everybody hates paying taxes, having to pay somebody to prepare taxes, and all the headaches and anxiety that comes with it.
Yeah, I hate all those things for sure.
You're not alone. And we as accountants didn't do a good job of really turning it around a little bit. So a couple of years ago, I hired a business coach, and I realized that because I was working a lot, I was super busy, but I was maxing out on the income that I was bringing in. And I was thinking, it doesn't look right. It doesn't feel right. So I hired a business coach, and the purpose was for me to learn how to manage my time better. But I was part of the coaching group where there was another CPA who not only learned to do that, but also turned around the way people look at taxes and the service to something completely different. I got some training after that, but I'll kind of mention it later. The transformation that I've experienced was that now I look at a tax return as the culmination of a year's worth of work with a client. I got trained in tax planning, proactive tax planning, and what that gives you is you look at a tax return as an opportunity to bring someone more money back into their bank account. I had a client who for years had an accountant, and I did some controller work for him, and he never wanted to give me his tax work because he thought I was expensive. And one year I got trained in tax planning, and immediately I reached out to him and I said, would you like me to take a look at your tax return? And I did. And I found that about 40,000 could have been deferred using legal tools that are available to him. And about 80 was overpaid because his accountant, the traditional accountant, which is sort of the conveyor belt operation, never stopped to look at what type of the income he generated. And some of that income was capital gains, which is taxed at a much lower rate.
Wow.
So I amended tax returns for him, got him back the 80,000, and certainly he switched accountants. So this mindset of this is something that I need and I hate dealing with is replaced by how can I make this deductible? How can I save more money on tax legally? How do I utilize tax law, benefits available in a tax law to keep more of my money?
Right. And ultimately what you did there is you transitioned from just being an accountant to being somebody who's a guide to help them grow their business. You help them be a guide to gain more revenue, to save more money, to prevent the government from taking as much as, or only let the government take as minimal as needs to be taken, within legal means. My accountant asked me the other day, he said, so how aggressive do you want to be with this and this strategy? And I was like, look, whatever is legal and allows me to not give as much money to the government, that's what I want to do. Anything that's not legal, those are things we do not want to do. Otherwise, it's open season,
Yeah. Yeah.
But having somebody who's a strategist is very different than somebody who's just an accountant. If I want to just do my taxes, there's plenty of software programs that I can pull it up and answer a few questions, and it'll kind of sort of mostly do it. And it's going to do a pretty decent job at the very fundamental stuff. What it's not going to do is help me figure out all those details and what could I possibly be missing, and what if I adjusted how this works or recategorized how this was or put some more money over here. And it's not going to make all those decisions. And that's kind of what you're talking about, is being a strategist more than quote unquote just an accountant.
Yeah. And the value of it really happens during the year, because once the year is over, once you're in March, there's nothing you can do to save money on last year's taxes.
Yeah. So you got to plan ahead for sure. I'm just kind of looking through your bio, and obviously you got the new book coming out. But one of the things that I found to be really important, more important now than ever, when I deal with my team that helps with accounting, is you think about this pandemic that we've all been going through, and from a business perspective, nobody prepared for this. But now the question is, all right, maybe we didn't have as much cash as we should have had aside, and now we're starting to realize what that should have been. And maybe we didn't have, maybe our recurring revenue is not as strong as we thought it was because we don't know how secure those clients are. And I need somebody to help me plan all this. So what are some things, like on a very fundamental level, that business owners should be doing now that are going to help them get through this pandemic ultimately, but also who knows what the next decade has ahead? How can we prepare for that well?
Well, there are a couple of things. And part of it is related to the Profit First methodology. We've had many phone calls since the pandemic has started with the mastery members of Profit First professionals. And many have shared that their clients are thankful that they've gotten involved into Profit First way before, because they've had all these reserves that they could use to sustain themselves. Now, what can you do to kind of prevent this type of situation from affecting you as much is plan. But planning aside, knowing your risks is probably one of the first and most important parts of dealing with uncertainty. So there are different models for analyzing risks. There is the SWOT model, the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. And when you know your risks, what it does is, and I'll talk about this in a second, there's this curve called the crisis management curve that Mike Michalowicz often talks about. And in the crisis response curve or whatever. And the crisis response curve, the first state that a business is faced with is the state of shock. Then the next step is sort of desperation and decisions and actions out of desperation. The third step is the evaluation step. Okay, now I'm in the situation. What are my options? What can I do? What should I do? So the goal for knowing your risks and understand and having a plan, it doesn't have to be a detailed plan, but it just could be ideas for attacking your risk, both internal and external risks, is to skip those first two steps, the state of shock and the state of desperate decisions, and get right to evaluation. And then the following step is deliberate action. So once you have a plan for your risks, I mean, cash reserves certainly help, but once you have a plan for your risks, once you know, okay, if this were to happen, if I were to stop receiving any kind of revenue, what can I do? If I couldn't operate as a business as it is, what could I do instead? Having that in your head ahead of time would just allow you to skip those first two steps and go straight to deliberate action.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful to think about, that idea of, we saw all that. We saw over the last few months a lot of the shock. We saw a lot of desperation. And some businesses, they're just in industries that are in really big trouble, and it's really hard for them to even figure out a plan. But having a plan B, having a backup, having a strategy that's already in place, instead of trying to pivot on the fly, makes a lot of sense. Yeah. One of the things I'm thinking about, I think a lot of people in business, I know I did, struggle with just numbers in general. Yeah. Not like, I understand numbers, but you know what I'm saying? Like the numbers on a P&L versus the numbers on a balance sheet, versus the numbers on a cash flow statement. Thinking about all these metrics, especially early in business, people are just kind of winging it. I mean, at least I did. And I think most people can wing it to a certain number of people and a certain amount of revenue. But after that, you start getting really stuck. So what I'm curious about for you is when you go into a new business, what are some of the most important KPIs, key performance indicators? What are the most important numbers that you think businesses need to have either a daily or a weekly or monthly pulse on?
I usually prefer, there's a number of ratios that a business can use, but the ratios alone aren't helpful. It's what you really do about them. I actually prefer, instead of having a set of KPIs, I usually look for, how are you planning for the future? How are you forecasting cash? Cash management is by far the most important part of numbers. And in my experience with all of my clients, past, present, and future, once a client has gotten cash under control and understands how to plan it, they become the greatest CEOs. I have this one client who's a visionary. He's far away from numbers as you could be. And he started, he got some help in the beginning, but it took him 10 years to get to the point where he realized that he can't grow his business anymore because he doesn't have that side of things under control. He doesn't understand what the reports are telling him. He gets frustrated and anxious before an accountant meeting. So he got help before me, and then I kind of inherited the client from another professional. But we started creating cash flow forecasts for first 3 months, then 6 months, then 12 months. And now it's a rolling 12-month cash forecast, which means, what does it tell you really? It's sort of a budget, line by line. How much income do you expect to bring in realistically, given everything you know today? And then how much do you plan to spend on every line item in the book? The bottom would give you a cash balance at the end of every month for the next, let's say, 3 months. And let's say in month 3, you see that balance is negative $5,000. It should tell you two things. First, you will run out of money if nothing changes. So either you look through the next 3 months of expenses or look for ways to find more income for those 3 months to bring in more cash, or to maybe delay a payment, talk to your vendors and explain the situation and work with them, be upfront. And two, sometimes you will need to borrow, but whenever you borrow, you would need to know why and how you plan to pay it back. So knowing that 3 months ahead gives you an advantage because you can actually create a strategy instead of freaking out that you don't have any cash. That by far has been the most impactful tool that I've taught clients and that they've started using and implementing. And I know that a lot of people, especially when they're starting out, struggle with this numbers and reports. And when I tell a client, when I actually had a new client last year who I told him, you should be looking at your reports every week. And a couple of weeks later, he says, I'm looking at them, but I don't know what they're telling me. So I said, listen, it's fine. Just ask me questions. I went to this conference last year and there was Ashton Kutcher. And Ashton Kutcher is known as, apparently, I didn't know this before this event, he's a very successful investor. So he was actually sharing how in the beginning, when he started investing money, he was asking every stupid question he could. He didn't understand a number, he asked. He didn't understand what that meant, he asked.
Right.
So that's what that's the advice that he gave. And that's the same advice that I'm giving my clients. If you don't understand what that number means, just ask me and I'll explain.
Yeah, absolutely. And really that idea of forecasting cash and understanding that is so important. I have personally been in situations where we had plenty of what we thought was planned revenue and there should have been plenty of money, but you can run out of cash. And understanding cash flow and like when that money's going to come in and when it's going to go out and how that timing all works out. We messed that up. I messed that up before. And I've had situations where I've almost run out of money because I did not forecast well. Yeah. And now that we have forecast plans in place, like I can see, what is that going to look like over the next, at least 90 days, because otherwise, you can think you're gonna have enough revenue, but if the cash is not right, it's a whole different ballgame for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
One of the things you mentioned earlier that I want to circle back to just a little bit was you talked about hiring a business coach. You mentioned it a couple of times. I'm curious what caused you to do that, first of all, and what was kind of some of the most valuable things that kind of came from that relationship?
So what caused it was that I was super busy, stressed out, but kind of capped in terms of my income. And I didn't really, and I had all these beliefs that, I want to be in business by myself and that I'll be happy with X amount of money and so on and so forth. And I mean, a lot of people actually go through business with the same belief and there's never any trigger, any catalyst to make them see that it could be different. So I read this book. It's an accounting geeky stuff book, whatever. And the book was called Get Paid What You're Worth. And in the book, she was talking about how she realized that being in business by herself will never allow her to be free. And suddenly it dawned on me that, it's basically me, that if I don't change something, that if I keep sticking to my, one woman show, I'll never be free. So after that, I got into her, she had a program, a tax planning program certification. So I got into that program, and along the way I met two coaches, the CPA who was my business coach's success story. So both of them created a program for CPA specifically, but the coach also coaches other professionals and other people. He's a sales coach and a business coach. So what I was looking for is more of a life-work balance, because accountants are notorious for not having any life-work balance at all.
Especially in April.
Exactly, yeah. So I didn't want that life. I didn't want to have that for the rest of my life. So I joined the program, and part of the program was packaging your services, charging more for your knowledge and your expertise. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it sounds so simple, but
It's
so
really
many of
not
us
though. Like it's really, that's really important. Like I want like that. People say that kind of stuff all the time. It sounds so simple, but it only sounds simple to you because you've already done it. You know
yeah,
what I mean?
yeah,
Like,
yeah,
but you think about yourself,
yeah,
2 years before somebody had told you that, you would have never thought of it. And now that you're actually doing it, it's a whole different world. So I
yeah,
just love that. Sorry, I didn't mean
yeah.
to interrupt you. I'm really good at that.
No, it's okay. It's okay. Yeah, it sounds simple now, but back then, how can I charge so much more? Nobody's going to pay me. Nobody, and how can I say no to a client? How can I not take a client that comes to my door? No way. So the business coach, most importantly, gave me confidence in selling my own expertise.
Hmm.
And there's this accounting value billing expert, Ron Baker, who told us at the conference. We were at the accounting conference last year or 2 years ago, and he said something like, "You're not selling your time, you're selling access to your brain." And that clicked for me. I was like, that makes perfect sense, because I'm not selling my time. I can answer your question in 5 minutes. Does that mean I earn 5 minutes, or did I spend 5 minutes because I spent 10 years studying?
That's right.
So the business coach actually gave me confidence, but he also enabled me to create a structured week. And that was, for me, probably one of the most valuable things out of the entire program. Mm. You structure your week so that you do certain tasks at certain times of certain days. So right now I work on my business off tax season, Mondays and Thursdays, and then Tuesdays and Wednesdays I create my educational programs, write scripts, write my book or whatever, do whatever I need to do to promote my other businesses. And Friday I just connect with people, record my podcast, and do other things. So that alone allowed me to stop checking email all the time. That's part of what Clockwork also talks about. Setting designated time to check email and do batch work and so on. So that has been transformational for my life. And during this past tax season, despite the fact that, and the previous one, despite the fact that my husband was in a hospital during COVID for 2 weeks, I had 10 people living in my house. My kids were at home. Despite that, I actually managed to finish most of my tax returns, and I worked 9 to 5. Mm. So the business coach, I never thought I'm the person who needs coaching.
Yeah.
But I was so wrong, because the coaching has transformed my life. And it's just, I could never be thankful enough for it.
Yeah, that's a great testimony. I think the reality is that we all need that in our life. Some of those, nuggets of wisdom of how to structure your day, how to structure your life, how to structure your business, how to package your products, it's just revolutionary. Even for me, I used to do podcasts just whenever people wanted to schedule them, basically. Yeah. And it was fine, but it was kind of chaotic because there's a certain amount of setup, certain amount of breakdown, certain amount of you just kind of get in the right mindset for it, And now I only do podcasts on Wednesday. So if somebody wants to be on my show, that's fine. It's going to be on a Wednesday. And they're like, well, I can only do Mondays. Okay, well, you're not going to be on my show then. Because I do podcast recordings on Wednesdays. And that sounds kind of ridiculous because that's just how strict I am with some of those things. But it's so much better. Because today I have 3 podcasts. Plus I'm on somebody else's. So I know I'm in the studio. I need to be prepared for that. Actually brush my hair today, stuff like that. And that's been so transformational for me too. So I totally get that. And I think what the value that a coach brings in those scenarios, regardless of what industry you're in, is that outside perspective. Yeah. Because so many times I think as entrepreneurs, we tell ourselves lies about all kinds of things that aren't true. We talked about this earlier about things we're good or not good at. We might actually be good at them. We just have always told ourselves we're not good at them. So we're not, And having somebody from the outside that goes, no, actually, I think you're really good at that. You need to do more of that. You're like, oh, really? Can be really, really helpful.
Yeah.
You talked a little bit about the idea of work-life balance. So let's transition to that a little bit. That's a big piece of the puzzle that I always like to talk about. I don't necessarily love the term, work-life balance, but it means something different to everybody. So 2 questions. One, what does it mean to you? What does the word work-life balance mean to you? And how has that changed for you over different seasons of your life?
So when you're an accountant working for somebody else, and if it's a traditional firm, which most firms in the US are, there's no life balance. There's just work. And, you would think that after tax season, you could, I don't know, work 3 days a week or 4 days a week to make up for that extra time. But no, you still work 5 days a week. So a partner in my firm that I worked for used to say that my wife says to everybody that I don't have a husband for 3 months of the year. And that's true. So my life for those couple of years that I worked for a CPA firm, and I didn't have any children, which is fortunate, was very demanding. I mean, I was also keeping a couple of clients on the side, of my own bookkeeping clients on the side. So for me, I work 24/7. I mean, I'm fortunate that I love what I do. So I love the experience and I love the work, but I couldn't imagine doing that with a family. And I was traveling a little bit. I was doing kind of everything that I wanted to do. So I was fortunate enough to be able to do that, but I never again want to be in the same place. So I think after I quit and I started my own practice, that's when I really got the life balance. I mean, that feeling when it's Monday and you don't have to go to work is freaking amazing. And I loved it. And I was like, this feels a little strange. Like, what's wrong? I don't have to go to work. Like, I can actually go to a doctor during the day, like, instead of begging them to wait for me in the evening. So it's a completely different freedom for me. Being your own boss is completely different. And I also have an assistant. I have, other people. I have a bookkeeper that I work with. And I'm very understanding with them because of that. I'm aware that, how much of a prisoner, like I felt when I was working full time, that I don't want anyone to feel that way, anyone who works with me. So now the work-life balance, especially after the coach training, is phenomenal. I have the ability to be with my kids when I need to. I have the ability to drive them to school or to stay home with them when they're sick without thinking about, am I going to lose, a paycheck or whatever. And interestingly, at first I was apologizing to clients. I was like, listen, I'll get to your stuff tomorrow. But realistically speaking, there's nothing that's like an emergency in accounting. And it took me a while to kind of get that,
Right. Yeah, it's interesting. And frankly, in most of our businesses, most people's businesses, there's not that many true emergencies. Yeah. There are some, like certainly if you're in the medical field or, all kinds of other places there might be. But, like I run a marketing agency and we help other people grow their business. We don't have emergencies. Like we might, like on the application development side, because a server's down or something and people can't get to their website. That's pretty urgent. But, my brother and sister-in-law are doctors, and if they do something wrong, somebody could die. That doesn't happen for us. Worst case scenario, somebody loses a little bit of money. Hopefully that never happens, but it's the case. So I love that perspective and that idea. And also I think it's something to think about for those of us that lead teams. Like, I have 19 other people that depend on me at the company. So what kind of life am I allowing them to have? Like, am I creating a prison where they hate Mondays? I always say, like, one of our core values is joy. I don't want anybody to show up and hate Monday. And if they do, I'm doing something wrong or they're in the wrong job, one or the other. Yeah. And so, I think for people that are leaders out there, that's something to think about. It's like, and ask those questions, because I think that the reality is it's different for everybody. Some people just want more money, but most of the time it's not just about the money. Like, yes, we all need money. Yes, more of it is better than less of it, usually. But there's more than that. There's the freedom that it's create. There's schedule. There's time. There's life. There's all these other kind of things to think about. So I'm curious just about the book. So we'll circle back to that, and then we'll kind of go to parting thoughts and where people can find you online. So it says the title is Dream Bold, Start Smart. What's the idea behind it? why'd you write it? Kind of what's the idea of the book?
The book came as I realized that, well, first of all, let's back up for a second. I built a business where it's high end, which means it's expensive. So I've realized that I can have an impact. I have an impact on clients' lives all the time. But the people who need my expertise most are the people who can't afford it. People who are just starting out, just testing their idea, or just need to know which entity they need to form. And because of that, I realized that I want to close that gap. I want to have a much bigger impact in my life because I'm obsessed with accounting. I geek out over tax stuff and tax strategies and tax court cases and so on. But I want to have an impact. I want to change the life of a person who maybe never would have started a business if it wasn't for my book, because they would be overwhelmed by the money, numbers, taxes, by all of those things, and not know how to navigate it, and maybe not be able to afford to pay for that expertise and information. So I wrote the book so that someone who has a dream can actually know what to do, whether or not to get a partner, whether or not to get investor capital. And there are some surprising answers to those questions. Which entity is the right for them? How to plan cash, how to price your offer. I want them to at least have a solid foundation of knowledge, and that will actually develop a skill, and the skill to start any business you ever want. So it's time to dream bold, but you have to start smart. That's kind of how the idea of the title and the book came about.
I love it. Those are things that I'm passionate about too. Not so much the accounting, but the idea of helping other people achieve their dreams, and I just love that part of things. So, where can people find you online? What's the best place for people to learn more about you and what you do?
So it's my website, my author website, talktotatiana.com. I actually have a guide that I've just recently posted and developed. It's how to be the boss of your bottom line. Some of the basic things that it can be downloaded, and there are some spreadsheets that you can use. They're very simple, very starter kind of package or whatever, starter information. So I notice that accountants in general are often speak in language that people don't understand. So I actually wanted to be different. So I started simplifying concepts to explain them to people, because there are concepts that are important. So I created this little guide that people can download and at least get a head start. They will be in a better place than they would have been otherwise.
Awesome. We'll put the link to that in the show notes, talktotatiana.com. There's a lot of T's in that. Thanks for sharing that. I will download it myself and take a look as well.
Sure.
As we think about leaving parting thoughts to other entrepreneurs, business owners who are working really hard to build a business that lasts, what parting thoughts would you leave with them today?
If you're thinking of starting a business, or if you're already started a business, when it comes to numbers, money, and taxes, don't fake it till you make it. Face it, and face it early. That's the secret to success.
Absolutely. I should have done a lot more of that a lot earlier in life, and I would have been a lot better off, but thankfully I figured out in the later years. Tatiana, thanks so much for being on the show. It's been great to hear your story, and I'm going to go check out that content offer that you have on your website as well. Thanks for being here.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. It's been amazing. I loved it.
All right, that's a wrap for the podcast. And Facebook folks who may be out there, whether you're watching now or watching later on a replay, feel free to leave any comments or questions below, and I will come back and answer those, or reach out to Tatiana and get you an answer. This is my last podcast for the day, so I will be back next Wednesday, as I said. If you want to watch these live, otherwise the regular episodes get released, I think, Tuesdays on podcasts. Make sure you subscribe to that in the email. All right, Facebook, we'll see you all later. Okay, that's it. Well, that's a wrap. Thanks for being here.
Thanks so much for having me. My dog was about to bark, so I was like, I muted myself.
Well, as soon as we get the show edited and get links and stuff, we'll send those over to you so you can share them if you would. That'd be great. And
Absolutely. I would love to. Yeah, awesome. Yeah. I'll promote you. I'll add you on my Instagram and so on and so forth. So
great. Sounds wonderful. Thanks so much. Have a great day.
Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Hey, I hope this video has helped you with some tips and ideas to build a business that lasts. Make sure you subscribe to our channel so that you don't miss out on the next videos that we roll out. And more importantly, for some awesome free resources, head over to our website at buildingabusinessthatlasts.com. You can get a free copy of my book there where I tell you how I have built an agency that's grown year over year for the last 20 years in a row. So go grab that, buildingabusinessthatlasts.com, and make sure to subscribe to our channel. Thanks. We'll see you soon.